Dog, rescue, werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I find myself caught up in a bad situation because I didn't listen to people who warned me about a werewolf pack. I deliberately walked into a dangerous area because I thought I knew better than the locals knew about their own area. I was arrogant, and now I've got to pay the price for the rest of my life. This is because I allowed myself to get bitten by what I thought was a dog, but what was actually something far worse, something that I am now as well. I had just finished grad school, and I was volunteering at an animal rescue. I had seen a pack of dogs hanging out by an old abandoned house on my way into town, and when I had a chance, I brought them up with my manager. I figured if we were the local animal rescue people, then we should be finding them new homes, or else we should figure out what else should be done about these dogs. I mean, that abandoned house was a 10-minute walk from the office I was sitting in, so it seemed like this was something that had to be taken care of. Well, my supervisor wouldn't even discuss it with me, but she wouldn't say why. She just looked scared and changed the subject each time I brought those stray dogs up. One day at lunch, a coworker came to me and quietly explained that the dog pack I had seen was a pack of werewolves. I inhaled my bottled water and I choked for a while. A pack of what? When I could breathe again, I told my coworker that she and everyone else around there was just a superstitious yokel. I said those dogs had been left abandoned, and it was our job to rescue them, not to make up ghoulish fables explaining why it's okay if we don't. Someone else in the office came over and told me to calm down. When people tell me to calm down, I get even angrier, and so I stormed out of that office into the hot night. I needed some air, and also I had decided to walk the 10 minutes to that abandoned house and eyeball the situation those dogs were living in. Then I figured I could sleep on it and pitch a plan to my bosses in the morning. It seemed like a good idea to me, and I expected to be praised for my ambition. When I got down to the house, I only saw a few of the smaller dogs at first. I bent down to pet one and saw that he was covered in ticks. I could smell that house interior from outside, and I didn't think it was a good place to just let these dogs continue to live in. The little ones gathered around me were all friendly. Too friendly, in fact, until I could get them a flea bath. I was about to laugh out loud at the concept of these pups being monsters, but then a very large, light-colored dog appeared right next to us. I mean, I suppose he walked up, but he did so silently, and I was surprised to suddenly notice him so nearby. I gasped and drew back quickly, which frightened one of the smallest of the dogs, who snapped in my hand and bit me. The bite was surprisingly painful, and I made a noise which seemed to anger the larger beast. The huge dog growled at me so deeply that it made the ground under my feet vibrate. It pulled its black lips back and revealed teeth big enough to fit in the mouth of a tyrannosaur. Once he had my attention, though, I saw the creature's lips once again close, and the vibration all around us ceased. The immense beast looked at me, and a flood of thoughts and ideas washed through my mind. I thought at first that these were my own thoughts, but some of them were very alien to me and made no sense. I suddenly happened upon the concept that my mind field was intertwining with the large dog's energy field. Now that's not something I would have ever thought before. To me, the mind was in the brain, but when I was near that large dog, I could sense that we were each walking in a field of electricity, and that our mind and our personality were sort of part of the electric field we were equipped with. When he stood that close to me, it sounded like radio interference, and it tickled in an uncomfortable way in my belly. I began to know things, and I didn't like these things I was knowing. They were mean things. They were nasty things. I looked at the dog and he looked so happy to see me sad. Now, none of this seemed possible. I decided I'd better get home because I was starting to get groggy in the heat and imagine things. But then that dog breathed his hot breath into my ear, and I could hear words in the hot, smelly air. They were words of discouragement. They were insulting words. Well, they were insulting ideas and thoughts, let's say. I'm not sure if I was hearing words or if I was hearing intent or meaning. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I'm also not sure if this experience itself made sense. So either I was imagining things, or that big dog was telling me that I was one of them. They didn't need to be rescued, but I did. He was telling me I was going to leave my job and I was going to come live with him. Like a dog. And it made sense. The way he told it to me, it made sense to me, so I started to think it over. It was a terrifying moment when I realized exactly what I had just been thinking over. An offer to give up my humanity and live like a dog in filth. The creature must have a hypnotic ability, if it is just a creature after all. I suspected I was dealing with a hypnotist who was creating the illusion of the large dog. Never once did I consider the explanation the others had already given me before I even came there. This was a pack of werewolves. This was not a pack of stray dogs at all. It was a far simpler solution, so why did I never consider it? Why had I thought I knew better than the people who had lived here for years already? Then I realized that my second set of thoughts seemed just as crazy as my first set had seemed. Werewolves weren't real. But you know what is real? Leaking gas fumes. I looked around and I sniffed around. Something was making me hallucinate. Something was making me think crazy thoughts. I figured there must be some kind of gas or electrical field making people imagine things. They say this can happen on those ghost hunting shows, so maybe that was what was happening at that old place. I wondered if methane could make you see things because there did seem to be an odor of it at that location. I liked that explanation, that something had been causing people to hallucinate in the vicinity of the dogs for all these years, and that was how the legend of them being werewolves had begun. I started walking away from the location and back toward the office when I could feel the transformation beginning. I didn't feel as though anything were visible on the exterior yet, but I could feel both my top and bottom rows of teeth begin to grow outward, and they brought my nose with them. It was only the very beginning of it, but I somehow knew what was going to happen next, just the same as if it had happened to me before. It was what the big dog had told me was gonna happen. I was becoming like one of them. This made me feel pretty panicked, and I ran to get back to the office. It was gonna be a long run though, and when I passed some houses, I screamed to the people inside for help. A man came out of one of the houses and a woman out of another. Both of them seemed concerned and asked me what was wrong. I told them that I was being turned into a wolf, and they both looked down the road toward the abandoned house that the dog pack lived in. "You've been at the house, haven't you?" asked the woman. But the man answered for me, saying, "That's exactly where she's been. You can tell just by looking at her." The woman gave me a glare for having interrupted her chores, and returned inside her house. The man practically ran backward to get behind the locked door and away from me. Everybody knew those dogs were werewolves. Everybody knew. Nobody was going to help me, and it was my own fault. I had been warned, and I just laughed. I called people superstitious, but I was the one who was out of touch with reality. I could feel sideburns starting to grow in. just the same as I could feel my nose and my jaws expanding forward. Everything was spinning both inside and out, and I was panicking. I just sort of ran down the road, not wanting to bother any more people in the homes I was running past. They would only glare at me. They would only tell me that I brought it on myself. The end of my nose felt like it was on fire, as the cartilage inside it rearranged itself, as if it had done this 1,000,000,000,000 times before. I screamed out, sometimes in pain, sometimes from the sheer weirdness I was experiencing. With the changes came this occasional burst of anger and hatred toward the entire world. In those moments, I wanted to tear living things apart. It must be what they call the blood rage. I can understand why people are scared of us werewolves. We have manic and violent tendencies. I mean, there are times when you feel so agitated that you could eat through a wooden fence. That's what it feels like. And of course, it's a lot worse on the full moon. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me stick to that first time they made me transform. The first hair I remember growing was on my chin and along the sides of my face where the sideburns grow on men. My teeth began changing early on too. They were long fangs first, and then the jaw actually began to extend outward, as fur grew on it simultaneously. With me that first time, I grew fur on my face that fell out and grew back and fell out and grew back, all within a period of maybe 10 or 20 minutes. It was a different color each time. Sometimes it was one color like blonde, and other times it grew in patterns, the way you might expect on an animal. Now, none of this hurt exactly, but it was also incredibly uncomfortable, and sometimes I just screamed from how it was making me freak out. I've always been a very squeamish person, and this is the most annoying non-stop biological cause of squeamishness that I've ever had to endure. Try to imagine what it might feel like for your internal organs to reorganize themselves inside of your rib cage while your bones and cartilage pop and morph around them. I would not actually begin to have my body change its outward appearance until after my face decided to finish becoming a werewolf face. But the insides were cracking and popping as though getting ready for the big transformation. It felt horrible. Some people say that transforming into or back from a werewolf can be an ecstatic experience. I think they must have a different definition of ecstasy from mine, because werewolf transformations for me suck. I keep talking about how nasty it feels, but there are also random points where you just get seized up in excruciating pain too. I mean the kind of sudden pain that comes out of nowhere, grabs your entire body up hard in a cruel way, and when it subsides a few seconds later, you literally have already forgotten who you were and what you were about to do before that pain wave hit you. You know, it's sort of weird about the werewolf thing. People talk about it like it's Jekyll and Hyde, one personality or the other. But especially in that first transformation, I kept forgetting who I even was over and over, and having to wake up into life again each time. I don't just mean forgetting my name, but forgetting what I was, where I was, the whole enchilada, as my mother says. So, rather than feeling like Dr. Jekyll battling Mr. Hyde for control, to me it's more like the transformations remind me that neither my human nor my wolfen personalities are really even real. The real me is the one that keeps waking up from the extremely uncomfortable parts of the transformation. The real me is the one that's there wondering where I am and who I am. That's the real me. And that's the real you and the real everybody. The personality is like a program or an app you're running. But when you wake up with amnesia, that's your operating system. That's the real you, see what I mean? And the human and the werewolf selves, those are just two apps you're running in the operating system that you really are. Trippy, right? But that's how I strongly feel about it. because of the way I kept blacking out in the middle of the big change, and the way I had to keep, over and over, re-examining who I was and where I was. And each time I caught a glimpse of my reflection, it looked different than it had the time before. It was not one steady progression toward being a canine. It was advance and then retreat and then advance again, with a different approach almost every time. I did not get claws, I did not get body fur, until the very end of the process. Although that is not usually the way it's happened since then. It's more of a hair growth first kind of phenomenon now, but that first time it was almost as though the fates were trying out different kinds of fur and different kinds of fangs and dog snouts and so forth. I did get little doggy ears, but they were never as big as my hair, so they weren't even visible in most transformations. I saw cats run away from me in fear. I saw parents pull their children inside as I passed. I looked at scared faces peering out at me from behind locked windows, and I tried to tell them that I wasn't dangerous, but all that came out was a long, low, mournful howl. Walking became more difficult as I felt my ankles and feet becoming something else entirely. I am able to run much faster after the transformation is complete, but I'm not good for much of anything while the changing process is still going on. After some length, I began to realize that humans were no longer my friends, nor were the kinds of animals that humans like to have around them. Suddenly I felt a deep hatred for pets, for squirrels, for songbirds. I now wanted to hurt and silence each of them. I now understood how they hated me, and it wasn't so much that I hated them back. It was more like I knew I was being ostracized and cast out forever. It was quite an intense feeling of hopelessness, on top of the agony and the awareness that things were only going to get a lot worse from here. I found myself passing out leaning on people's fences, waking up seeing red and thinking horrible thoughts of eating things alive. At other points I remember staggering around and wondering where I was and what I was doing there. Everything was uncomfortable, and I was so incredibly hot. I mean, it was a very warm night to start with. My mouth was now part of an animal's snout, like a dog or a pig. That's how I felt, too, like a pig. The transformation continued and continued, until my face was entirely covered in fur. Then, once that was done, the rest of my body tickled all over intensely, as fur covered every centimeter of skin within just seconds. I let out a noise because of that, which not only didn't sound like a sound I would make, it didn't sound like a sound I could make. It was an animal noise, and I knew that I was an animal. So I went back to that big dog, just as he said I would. I am not able to hold down a job any longer. I have not gotten my werewolfism under control yet. Each time I turn, I run back to that big dog just like he told me to. I had to move back in with my mother, as she keeps me tied up in the yard at night so that I can't run off again. If I didn't know better, I'd say my mother actually prefers me in this predicament. She jokes that I'm easier to train now than I've ever been before, but I don't see what's so funny about that. I don't see what's so funny about any of this. I would like my mother to help me find a way to reverse this werewolf curse, but she doesn't seem particularly motivated to do so. She says all the werewolves she knows do their own research. I feel that her sense of humor is completely inappropriate in light of my terrible situation. In the movies, mothers help cure their sick kids. In reality, they celebrate their daughters' failures and setbacks because they no longer understand the role of a nurturer. These days, mothers compete with their daughters, and nobody ever grows up. And I'm never going to be able to grow up and have my own life either, unless I can somehow undo this werewolf curse, which I caught off of that. Dog, rescue, werewolf. She's as bright as a supernova. Of course, I'm talking about Stella Cordova. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Stel Cordova, for making this episode possible. Stel is a channel member, and so she gets to see our secret uncensored Dogman episodes, which come out 4 times per month and are available only to our channel members and to our PayPal Club members at peterbernard.com. Here to explain it all more clearly is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/peterbernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.